Portugal has been marketed as a desirable vacation spot. A relaxed European lifestyle, sun, safety, and affordability. However, after the camera stops rolling, the encounter might feel completely different for Black people. In practice, what appears friendly on paper may not necessarily be the same. Furthermore, the truth frequently lies in the specifics that people choose not to talk about. Welcome to the pros and cons of Black living in Portugal. Here we shares the facts that Black expats don't tell. When questions like, is Portugal safe for Black people? Or, is Portugal racist? Begin to move from theory to reality, this video deconstructs the silent experiences of many Black expats, Black Americans, Africans, and Black digital nomads in Portugal. Because context is important and the last item can contradict all you believe, stay with me through this countdown. Let's start by discussing the reasons why so many Black people are relocating to Portugal. If you appreciate candid relocation discussions, please like and subscribe to the video. Safety and a low rate of violent crime come first. This is the one thing that the majority of Black expats in Portugal agree on. The nation is at peace. It's just ordinary peace, not performative or, don't go out after dark. Quote. According to statistics, violent crime is uncommon in Portugal, which frequently ranks among the safest nations in Europe. That's important because safety is more than just statistics. It has to do with the sensation of your body traveling across space. After a few weeks, a sort of calm relief is described by many Black inhabitants. You become aware of it when your shoulders are relaxed and you're walking home late. When disputes in public don't get out of hand, you can tell. When there is a little police presence. When going out at night doesn't seem like a calculated risk. One Black American expat in Lisbon put it plainly, "This is the first place I've lived where I don't mentally scan a room before I sit down." Quote. Another said, "I walk at night here the same way I walk in the daytime. No plan, no fear." That doesn't mean prejudice disappears. It means it usually doesn't show up as violence. Bias here is more likely to be awkward than aggressive, subtle rather than explosive. You might feel stared at before you ever feel threatened, and that distinction matters. Safety is about what doesn't happen as much as what does. Data backs up the lived experience. Portugal consistently scores high on global safety and peace indexes with low rates of violent crime and firearm-related incidents. Street crime exists. This is a real country, not a postcard, but it tends to be opportunistic and non-violent. Pickpocketing, yes, random assaults, far less so. A Black British resident summed it up with dry humor. "My biggest danger here is losing my phone, not my life." What's interesting is how this safety reshapes your day-to-day psychology. People linger outside longer. Conversations stretch. You don't rush home just because the sun went down. One Cape Verdean Portuguese resident said, "Here, the streets don't feel angry. That calm isn't accidental. It's cultural. Conflict avoidance is a norm, not a weakness." Still, let's be honest. Safety doesn't equal belonging. Feeling physically secure doesn't automatically mean feeling fully seen. But when violence isn't part of the equation, everything else becomes easier to navigate. You have space to observe, adapt, and decide for yourself. And that's the point. Portugal's safety doesn't answer every question, but it removes one of the biggest fears from the table. When survival isn't the daily concern, you're finally free to ask the deeper ones. Number 2, slower pace of life, less daily stress. One of the first things Black expats notice after settling into Portugal isn't the food, the weather, or even the architecture. It's the silence. Not literal silence, but the absence of urgency. The constant background pressure that tells you to hurry, explain yourself, or stay alert just fades. And that shift does something to your nervous system. Portugal runs on a different clock. Meals are meant to be long. Conversations aren't rushed. Stores close in the middle of the day without apology. People aren't competing with you for space, volume, or dominance. For many Black Americans and Africans coming from high-pressure environments, the mental health relief is almost immediate. One Black American expat living in Porto said, "I didn't realize how tense I was until I wasn't anymore. My body relaxed before my mind caught up." Quote, "This slower pace isn't laziness, it's cultural design." Portugal consistently ranks well in work-life balance metrics across Europe, with fewer extreme work hours and a strong emphasis on time outside of work. The result is a society that doesn't reward constant stress. And when the environment isn't aggressive, you don't have to armor up just to exist. There's humor in the adjustment, too. Appointments start late. Emails don't demand instant replies. Bureaucracy moves at what many expats jokingly call Portuguese speed. One Nigerian expat laughed. "At first, I thought nothing was getting done. Then I realized things were getting done just without panic." That distinction matters. Productivity here isn't performative. What's especially noticeable for Black expats is how the lack of social aggression changes daily interactions. People don't cut in line as often. Voices rarely escalate. Disagreements tend to dissolve instead of explode. A Black British resident in Lisbon put it this way: "I don't feel like I'm bracing for the day anymore. I wake up neutral." Neutral sounds small until you've lived without it. Of course, this pace isn't perfect. It can feel frustrating if you're wired for speed or used to efficiency as a form of control. But stress reduction isn't about perfection. It's about sustainability. Portugal offers a rhythm where your worth isn't measured by how fast you move or how much tension you carry. That slower rhythm creates space, space to breathe, space to think, space to notice how much energy you use to spend just getting through the day. And once you feel that difference, it raises an uncomfortable question. Was all that stress ever necessary, or was it just normal where you came from? Number 3, cost of living compared to Western Europe and major US cities. Money is where the Portugal conversation usually gets loud, and for good reason. While prices have undeniably risen, Portugal still operates on a different financial wavelength than much of Western Europe and most major US cities. The gap isn't imaginary, and it shows up in the everyday stuff that quietly drains or preserves your sanity. Let's start with the basics. Groceries in Portugal are noticeably cheaper than in France, the UK, or Germany, especially when you shop local markets instead of imported brands. Fresh produce, bread, seafood, these are staples, not luxuries. One Black American expat living in Lisbon joked, "I stopped doing mental math at the checkout. My life was made better just by that." Despite the humor, that moment is important. Stress decreases when choosing meals no longer feels like a financial decision. Another significant area where Portugal excels out is in the healthcare system. The cost of private insurance is a small portion of what many Americans are accustomed to paying, and public health care is significantly subsidized. To put it plainly, a Black foreigner from Atlanta said, "My annual health care costs are lower here than they were back home." Not only does that type of math alter your budget, but it also alters your life planning. The same is true of transportation. In Lisbon and Porto, monthly passes for public transportation are reasonably priced, dependable, and popular with people of all income levels. Since you don't require a car to operate, you may eliminate a whole category of costs from your daily calculations, including gas, insurance, parking, and repairs. An African expat put it succinctly. "My bank account instantly realized that I no longer needed my car." Let's be honest now. Particularly in Lisbon, Porto, and the Algarve, rent is increasing. Anyone who acts as though housing pressure doesn't exist isn't listening. Costs, however, frequently stay lower than those in similar neighborhoods in Paris, London, New York, or Los Angeles, even with rises. The difference is not miraculous, but proportionate. Portugal is not inexpensive. It's less expensive in contrast. For black expats adjusting to life overseas, that comparison is significant. You reclaim flexibility when you're not chased by the cost of living all the time. You have the option to prioritize preparation over panic and experiences above survival. It was best expressed by a longtime resident. I wasn't wealthy because of Portugal. My money became quieter as a result. And sometimes the greatest luxury of all is silent money. Fourth, there are robust black and Afro-ethnic populations in urban areas. The idea that black life in Portugal is invisible is among the most pervasive myths about the country. Those who never leave postcard neighborhoods are usually the ones who have that notion. A very different picture emerges as you get outside of the tourist area, particularly in Lisbon, Amadora, Setúbal, and portions of Porto. The presence of black people here is not new, foreign, or transitory. It is interwoven, layered, and ingrained in daily urban life. Afroport populations with strong ties to Cape Verde, Angola, Guinea, Bissau, and Brazil have long existed in Lisbon in particular. It is evident in the street discussions that smoothly switch between Portuguese and Creole, the barbershops, the cuisine, and the music. I didn't expect community. I expected to be tolerated. Instead, I found familiarity. Quote, "That distinction is more important than most people realize," according to a black expat from New York. Black culture feels lived in, not curated, in Amadora and portions of wider Lisbon, which makes them particularly worth mentioning. It's a place where children learn to speak several languages, where local companies represent the community they serve, and where being black does not always make you the outsider. Here, nobody asks me where I'm really from. They already know. Quote, "This sense of recognition lessens the emotional burden of having to explain yourself all the time," according to a Portuguese resident of Cape Verde. Although there are fewer black people in Porto, they are more subdued and less concentrated. There are Brazilian and African communities in several districts that serve as social hubs for newcomers. To be more specific, one black British expat who lived there said, "Porto won't overwhelm you with community, but it won't leave you stranded either. It's quieter support, but support nonetheless." Quote, "This feeling of community is unique to a city. Pretending differently would be a disservice to anyone studying life in rural Portugal, as it is a very different experience. However, you're much less likely to feel alone in cities. You'll recognize the accents. There are cultural events. People who resemble you will be seen leading ordinary, average lives. The point is that these communities don't provide safety from every difficult situation or perfection. They provide grounding. They serve as a reminder that black existence in Portugal is real. It's continuous, social, and useful." It was best summed up by one longtime inhabitant. "My blackness was not erased by Portugal. It provided background. And sometimes a place's context is what makes it tolerable rather than alien." The fifth is residence pathways and legal protections. Something that isn't featured in travel vlogs is among the most significant, and least dramatic, things Portugal has to offer black expats. Predictability in the legal system. In Portugal, the regulations are documented, open to the public, and frequently implemented in a way that feels more procedural than individual. When you're living overseas, that distinction is important. Portugal's legal system contains explicit anti-discrimination rules, especially in the areas of public services, employment, and housing. Bias is not eradicated by these regulations. They set boundaries, but no legislation ever has. Just the fact that there is a set procedure in place in case something goes wrong gives one a sense of stability. This is how one Black American expat put it. "I'm not looking for perfection. All I want to know is that the rules remain the same regardless of who is in front of the counter." Portugal is unique in the issue of residency pathways as well. For non-EU citizens, the nation provides a number of legal pathways, including as work visas, family reunification possibilities, and income-based visas like the D7. None of these are simple. They are obvious, yet Portuguese bureaucracy has a reputation that has been earned. The requirements are made public. There are timelines. Persuasion doesn't do the tough lifting, paperwork does. For Black expatriates accustomed to subjective or opaque systems, that structure is particularly crucial. Here is a direct statement from a Nigerian professional who lives in Lisbon. "Your story is of no interest to anyone. Your documents are important to them. It's refreshing, to be honest. That's funny, but it's also a relief. Stress levels decrease when compliance, not charisma, is the basis for residence." It's also important to note that Portuguese legal culture is generally less combative. Disputes progress within a framework, albeit excruciatingly slowly at times. Of all, having regulations on paper does not guarantee a seamless experience. As one long-time Angolan Portuguese resident put it, the system works, but only after you accept that it works at its own pace. That pace can test your patience, but it also reduces volatility. You're rarely blindsided. Quote, "There are delays. Gaps in communication occur. However, the existence of legal safeguards produces a slight yet potent effect. Make use of leverage. You're depending on more than just goodwill. If you fit the requirements, you're functioning within a system that acknowledges your right to be there." That sense of legitimacy is underestimated by many Black expatriates. Portugal does not give you a warm reception, but it also does not take advantage of you. You gain something priceless when your ability to remain is linked to explicit regulations rather than ebbs and flows. The capacity to make plans for the future without always watching over your shoulder. Here's what you won't learn about being a Black person living in Portugal. First, microaggressions and covert racism. In Portugal, racism is rarely overt. It doesn't yell. Usually, it doesn't confront you. It comes silently most of the time. So subtly that you're left wondering if anything actually happened. And that's what makes discussing it difficult. According to many Black expatriates, racism in this place is situational rather than persistent. It appears in spurts rather than marches. When you speak Portuguese fluently, you might look at someone for longer than required or abruptly transition to broken English. A presumption that you are not a resident but rather a migrant worker. Experiences differ greatly because of this nuance. One Black American who lived outside of Lisbon stated, "Nobody ever insulted me, but I kept getting asked where I really came from, even after I answered. Nothing dramatic, just repetitive enough to notice." Quote, "Diversity muffles much of this behavior in Lisbon and other big cities. Curiosity can turn into uneasiness outside of cities where Black people are less prevalent." In a smaller town, a Black British expat expressed it bluntly. "No one was impolite. They were simply perplexed by my presence. Even though that confusion isn't hostile, it might nonetheless wear you out." It's crucial to realize that Portugal's past influences the way that race is expressed. It is culturally discouraged to approach someone directly. Avoiding conflict is the norm. Therefore, when bias is present, it usually manifests as distancing instead of hostility. Instead of feeling endangered, you're more likely to feel alienated. This is how one Portuguese inhabitant of Cape Verde described it. "Racism is whispering here. It doesn't yell. It's simple to ignore that whisper unless you hear it frequently enough." Portugal records less violent racial occurrences than many of its neighbors, according to data and polls conducted throughout Europe. However, that does not negate racial bias. It implies that it is more difficult to quantify, more difficult to prove, and more easily dismissed. Because of this, many black expats find it difficult to express it without coming out as theatrical, even to themselves. People's coping mechanisms can also be humorous. A laughing African expat said, "I've learned to answer immigration questions with confidence, even when I'm just buying coffee." Quote, "Humor turns into armor because things are unclear, not because they're bad." Impact versus intent is the crucial difference here. The majority of microaggressions are not harmful. They are frequently unconscious, genetic, and habitual. However, subtle does not equate to inconsequential. Little moments add up to awareness over time. This is not unique to Portugal. There is quiet bias everywhere. Here, what's noteworthy is how easy it might be missed, particularly by people who haven't encountered it. Black expats are therefore left with a personal decision. Which situations should be ignored, which should be addressed, and which just guide your actions in the world? Fear is not the issue. It has to do with fluency. Gaining the ability to read the room without allowing it to define. Colorism and nationality bias come in second. According to several black expats, one of the more unsettling truths in Portugal has less to do with skin tone and more to do with how others perceive your position in the social order. It's not simply about being black, to put it another way. It has to do with the type of black person you are thought to be. Accents are important. A passport is important. Perceived class is important. Many black Europeans and black Americans claim that as they open their tongues, their experiences change significantly. Hearing an American accent can easily warm up a nice conversation. While the same situation may feel cooler or more distant for Africans or Brazilians, one black American expat admitted candidly, "I didn't feel different until I realized my accent was doing half the talking for me." This isn't always intentional and it isn't unique to Portugal, but it is widely acknowledged by people living there. Portugal's long relationship with immigration, particularly from former colonies like Angola, Cape Verde, and Brazil, has created layers of social perception. Some of those layers are rooted in class assumptions, labor history, and economic stereotypes rather than open hostility. A Cape Verdean resident explained it bluntly. "When they think you're here to work with your hands, the tone changes. When they think you're here by choice, it changes again." That distinction shows up in subtle ways. Service interactions feel smoother. Questions shift from "what do you do" to "what brings you here." A black European expat in Lisbon joked, "The moment they hear my French accent, I get upgraded to expat instead of immigrant." Quote, "The humor lands, but the implication sticks." Colorism plays a role, too, though it's often wrapped inside nationality bias. Lighter-skinned black people sometimes report fewer assumptions, while darker-skinned individuals, especially those perceived as African, describe more scrutiny. Again, this isn't shouted, it's implied. And because it's implied, it's easy to deny and hard to challenge. From a data perspective, studies across Southern Europe frequently point to nationality and socioeconomic status as stronger predictors of discrimination than race alone. Portugal fits that pattern. The bias isn't always about who you are. It's about where people think you come from and what they think that means. What makes this tricky is the emotional math it forces you to do. Do you correct assumptions? Do you let your accent work for you? Do you notice the difference and move on? One Angolan professional summed it up with dry sarcasm. "I didn't change. The room did after they figured me out." Portugal isn't uniquely guilty here. Many societies sort people quietly before they welcome them fully. The key is awareness. Understanding that nationality bias exists helps you interpret moments accurately without internalizing them. It's not about resentment. It's about realism. When you know the rules of perception, you can decide how much they matter to you and how much power you give them. Number 3, limited diversity outside major cities. Step outside Lisbon, Porto, or a handful of well-known urban pockets, and Portugal can start to feel very different, especially if you're black, not dangerous, not hostile, just quiet in a way that lands differently when you're the only one who looks like you in the room. In smaller towns and rural areas, diversity thins out fast. For many black expats, that means becoming hyper-V visible by default. You notice it in cafes where conversations pause for half a second. In grocery stores, where curiosity lingers a little too long. One black American living in central Portugal described it simply: everyone was polite. I just never blended in. That sentence comes up a lot. The isolation isn't about exclusion. It's about absence. No shared references, no familiar hair products, no casual unspoken understanding. A black British resident who tried living in a coastal village said, "I didn't feel unwelcome. Even amid a crowd, I felt isolated." It takes time to feel that type of loneliness. It builds slowly, then suddenly feels heavy. Quote, "Data explains part of it. Portugal's black and Afro-descendant populations are heavily concentrated in metropolitan areas, particularly around Lisbon. Outside those zones, many residents have limited exposure to racial diversity. Curiosity replaces familiarity. Most interactions are friendly, but they require more emotional energy. You're answering questions without being asked, representing without volunteering. There's humor in it, too." One African expat laughed. "I became the town's unofficial cultural exchange program. At first, that novelty can feel charming. People remember your name. Strangers wave. But novelty isn't community. Over time, the lack of mirrors, people who reflect you back to yourself, can quietly wear you down." What surprises many expats is how this affects everyday decisions. You start traveling back to cities more often just to recharge. You choose housing based on proximity to diversity, not just scenery. One long-term resident admitted, "I loved the countryside, but I needed to see myself sometimes. That need isn't political, it's human." This doesn't mean smaller towns are off limits. Some black expats thrive in them, especially with strong language skills or local connections. But it does mean expectations matter. Social comfort is different from physical comfort, and both deserve consideration. Portugal offers beauty and calm almost everywhere, but belonging is more unevenly distributed. Knowing where diversity lives helps you decide where you might live best. Sometimes the question isn't whether a place is peaceful. It's whether peace feels complete when you're experiencing it alone. Number 4, housing discrimination. Hard to prove, hard to fight. Housing is where many black expats say life in Portugal quietly tests your patience. Not because doors are slammed in your face, but because they often open at all. No explanation, no rejection letter, just silence. And silence is hard to challenge. Most discrimination here isn't explicit. Landlords rarely say no, they simply stop replying. Listings disappear. Viewings get postponed indefinitely. One black American expat summed it up with dry humor. "I learned Portuguese real estate has a special feature called ghost mode. It's funny because it's familiar and because it's deniable." Many black expats report needing to work harder to secure housing. Sending more messages, attending more viewings, offering more documentation. Not because they lack qualifications, but because the market is competitive and preferences, spoken or unspoken, exist. A Nigerian professional living in Lisbon said, "I had a solid income, references, everything. I took twice as long as my co-workers, though." In chats, that pattern keeps coming up. Proof is the challenge. Portugal has laws against discrimination, but they need to be enforced in housing, and when judgments are made in secret, there is little evidence to support them. Was the apartment stolen? Has the landlord had a change of heart? Or did you just disappear off the list? It was best explained by a resident of Cape Verde. It's exhausting to be unclear about whether it's the market or you. Bias is more likely to manifest in private renting markets, where demand is high and regulation is weak, according to data on housing discrimination throughout Europe. Portugal is a good fit for that. Increased rents in Lisbon, Porto, and the Algarve give landlords even more power to choose without having to justify their actions. There is also a pragmatic aspect to this. Many black expats adjust by giving longer rents up ahead, hiring relocation agencies, or utilizing local contacts. A humorous and truthful statement was made by a black French expat. "I didn't change who I was. I changed my strategy." Quote. This needs to be stated clearly. Many landlords are fair and professional, and not all of them discriminate. Even while patterns cannot be proven in court, they should be taken seriously when enough people report comparable difficulties. Everything is shaped by housing. Your comfort level, community, and commute are all impacted by where you reside. There may be an emotional cost to the process that is not reflected in the data when it feels opaque. Many black expats still find Portugal to be livable, friendly, and appealing. However, obtaining a property can call much more perseverance, adaptability, and forbearance than anticipated. Quiet obstacles can be the most difficult to overcome, not because the system is overtly antagonistic. Fifth, bias can be exacerbated by a linguistic barrier. Language is one element that subtly influences practically every Portuguese experience. Not just nationality, not just ethnicity, and not just language. More precisely, what occurs when life begins to provide minor challenges and you are not yet fluent in Portuguese. Many black expats claim that miscommunication, rather than animosity, was the source of their most annoying experiences. A dismissive tone, a response that seems colder than anticipated, or a situation that gets worse just because there is a breakdown in communication. It affects your perspective on everything. As one black American living in Lisbon put it simply, "I thought people were being rude until I realized they just didn't know how to explain things in English." Quote. Despite having a large English-speaking population, Portugal is not an English-first society. Language barriers quickly expand when discussions veer beyond the fundamentals of housing, healthcare, and bureaucracy. And those gaps can feel intimate when you're already adjusting to life as a foreigner. It was humorously stated by a Brazilian expat. "My trust in my Portuguese wanes when it falters." It turns out that confidence does a great deal of unseen work. Here, intent versus impact is crucial. Prejudice isn't the core cause of many dismissive situations. They stem from discomfort. Individuals withdraw to what they can control. They make talks shorter. They stay away from subtleties. Suddenly, you feel as though no one is listening to you. One Angolan citizen put it succinctly. Not that they didn't give a damn. The reason was because they lacked the necessary vocabulary. Language competency consistently improves results across immigrant groups, according to data. Social integration, healthcare satisfaction, and housing access. Portugal is hardly an exception. Black foreigners who devote time to studying Portuguese frequently describe a discernible change in their treatment. Relationships get softer. There are fewer assumptions. Comedy begins to appear. The day I argued in Portuguese was the day I felt local. A black British immigrant made a joke that conveys relief and pride. This lowers friction, but it does not imply that understanding the language eliminates all difficulties. And miscommunications flourish when there is conflict. Bias loses part of its oxygen when individuals are able to comprehend you and explain themselves. You begin to accurately read meaning and cease speculating about motives. Reclaiming agency through language also has an empowering quality. You are no longer reliant on goodwill or translations. You may clarify, speak up for yourself, and respectfully push back. As a final takeaway, Portugal isn't a place where language is optional. If you want depth, it's a place where language is a bridge. If you cross it, the country feels different, lighter, clearer, and more human. That's the real truth of living abroad. Culture doesn't open all at once, it opens in layers. If this video helped you think more clearly about life in Portugal, make sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your experiences matter here. If you want to hear candid discussions about relocation, expat life, and what it's like to live abroad, watch other videos on channel.